Even after 312 years, the Kikunoma tea house still smelled of cedar smoke and fresh tatami at dawn. Emiko Clark inhaled the scent with a private smile while she checked the utensils for the evening's moon-viewing chanoyu. She moved through the silent, reed-panelled rooms in tabby socks, her dark hair caught in a plait that hinted at her British mother's unruly curls. In the alcove of the main tea room waited the centerpiece of the occasion, Seiyu, a Meiji-era silver-inlaid teapot said to have passed through the hands of an imperial prince. Its celadon body shimmered like damp light inside a locked glass cabinet. Emiko unlocked the door, bowed, and lifted the vessel as though it contained the fragile first breath of spring. She checked the spout for chips, turned the lid, and felt a small pulse of relief. Perfect still. Her grandmother, Clark-san joked, would have called it overcautious. But Emiko's grandfather, Ueda Harunobu Koto, most exacting tea master until his death last winter, had taught her to read every utensil the way a detective read clues. She had no idea how literal that lesson would become before the night was over. Scene setting and guests. At noon, a veil of white-pink petals floated down from the nearly blooming cherries in Maruyama Park next door. The Kikunoma would host its annual Yozakura, an evening viewing of blossoms by lantern light, followed by a formal tea. Emiko's guest list was small enough to feel intimate, yet broad enough to produce the frisson her half-British father had called social electricity. 1. Mrs. Nishimura Reiko, widow of a shipping magnate, rumored to purchase art faster than dealers could appraise it. 2. Professor Sato Daichi, Kyoto University ceramic scholar, fox clever and fond of cincha more than matcha, but willing to feign reverence for either. 3. Harding Philip Emiko's honorary uncle from Norfolk, an antiquarian whose Japanese was as eccentric as his waxed mustache. 4. Yuko Emiko's 19-year-old tea apprentice, as earnest as spring grass. 5. Aiko Gaiko from Gion, invited for her shamisen and laughter, both irreplaceable sounds under moonlit blossoms. 6. Chef Kenji, never a guest, always a force. His kaiseki courses were legend, his temper nearly so. Emiko and Yuko rehearsed the choreography. The heavy glass doors of the antique cabinet clicked shut, and Emiko pocketed the key in her obi. When Yuko laughed at an errant blossom that flew in through the kitchen screen, Emiko teased, "Cherry petals may land anywhere tonight, just not inside the teacup." By late afternoon, lanterns glowed among the branches outside, as though the trees themselves had decided to keep watch over humankind. The teapot vanishes. At 6, the guests removed shoes and stepped onto tatami. Steam from the charcoal hearth produced a hush. Conversation fluttered, delicate as the petals passing the windows. Emiko began the usucha, the light tea that precedes kaiseki. She used an everyday Einen kettle seiyu's moment would come later, and permitted herself only one glance toward the glass cabinet. It was empty. The breath she drew tightened her ribs. She completed the whip of foam, bowed, and passed the bowl with hands as steady as the stone lantern in the garden. When the guests rose for intermission before dinner, Emiko signaled Yuko. "Quickly," she whispered, sliding the shirugi closed behind them. "Kutelipe o siuyu?" "Wait," she whispered, sliding the shirugi closed behind them. "The teapot is gone." Yuko's eyes widened to moon circles. "But you locked it." "Locks slow honest people. Look for anything disturbed." They found the cabinet undamaged except for faint scratches at the latch. A narrow garden window was ajar. On the tatami beneath it lay 3 pale petals and a ghostly smudge-fine white dust that crumbled when Emiko touched it. Clay, she suspected, not garden earth. She replaced the cabinet key in her obi, though now it guarded only absence. Maintaining calm's cool, cozy mystery, Emiko thought with a detached corner of her brain. That was how Philip Harding would describe it in his library back in Norfolk. but the coziness depended on the illusion of tranquility. She could not alarm the guests, or the reputation of Kikuno-ma would fall like overripe blossoms. Chef Kenji summoned them to dinner. Matsutake simmered in lacquer bowls, and sea bream gleamed under yuzu zest. Emiko observed her guests. Mrs. Nishimura complimented every course, yet barely ate. Professor Sato examined the glaze of his sake cup more than the sake. Harding told a quip about Queen Victoria mistaking soy sauce for sherry, and made everyone laugh, especially Yuko, who poured for him. Emiko excused herself for a moment and crept to the engawa, the veranda overlooking the garden. Lanterns bobbed between trunks. If someone had tossed or handed off the teapot there, she could see no sign. The white dust lingered in her mind. Where in Kikuno-ma could that clay originate? The silent footsteps, mekats, bikwa. After dinner, guests strolled beneath the blossoms, while Kenji cleared dishes for the final tea. Emiko slipped soft leather gloves on and inspected the tatami with a flashlight. She found a partial footprint near the cabinet. Geta sandal, maybe. Sole packed with that same white dust. Close inspection of the cabinet's pick suggested a thinacle, or thin spatula, not a thief's lockpicks. She knelt in the mizue, the preparation room, to examine the tea scoops. Only one, a bamboo chashaku carved by her grandfather, was slightly damp. The tip glistened as though recently washed. Odd. It had not been used tonight. Yuko re-entered carrying a tray. "Sato-sensei wishes to see you," she said. "He has questions about the glaze firing of Seiryu." "That's ironic, Her attempt at humor broke on her lips. "You found nothing yet?" "Only questions," Emiko murmured. "Tell him I'll join shortly." Yuko hesitated. "Harding-san was by the storage shed earlier when I fetched sake. He said he wanted fresh air, but he was sweating. Maybe he—" A scream spiraled through the garden. The murder guests converged by the largest cherry tree. Lantern light quivered on a fallen figure face down, in petals white as bone. Philip Harding's tweed jacket looked wildly out of place amid kimono silk. A bamboo chashaku protruded from his neck like a slender stake. Eiko muffled a cry. Mrs. Nishimura swayed, clutching her obi. Kenji sprinted to the gate to summon police. Emiko knelt, heart hammering, no pulse. The same scoop she had noted missing from its stand glowed pale under lantern light. Tiny rust flecks spotted the bamboo. Emiko realized with horror that they were not rust. Detective Fujimoto, a compact man with a weather-soft overcoat, arrived within minutes, offering curt condolences before sealing the premises. He accepted Emiko's explanation that she was the resident tea master and permitted her to stay near while officers took statements. Missing teapot, dead antiquarian, Spring's fragile piece cracked like raku ware dropped on stone. Interviews. Fujimoto questioned each guest in the side room. Emiko listened, taking her own mental notes. "Professor Sato, I was admiring the moon from the north veranda," he said, adjusting spectacles. "Harding wanted to debate the authenticity of Seiryu. I told him to wait until after tea. I heard nothing until the scream. Sato's Geta souls revealed caked white clay. He explained he'd visited an excavation that morning near Fushimi, where potters once dug kaolin. Habit, he shrugged. I walk everywhere in the same shoes, Mrs. Nishimura." She dabbed eyes with embroidered silk. "Philip and I discussed an auction in London. He suggested I lend Seiyuyu to the British Museum." "Absurd. The vessel belongs in Kyoto." Her sandal white leather was spotless. Her pale plum kimono, however, bore 3 dark flecks at the hem, scarcely bigger than sesame seeds. "Yuko, I was in the kitchen helping Kenji-san with pickles." Her voice trembled. "I grabbed plates, ran to the storage shed for spare bowls." Harding-san was outside, humming. He asked how late the last train left for Osaka. "That's all. Kenji, I heard nothing, preparing sweets." The chef glowered, arms crossed. Whoever did this ruined my kaiseki. Aiko playing shamisen for the pedals. She demonstrated, slender fingers miming strings. Harding-san walked toward the old well, then vanished behind the trees. Clues. The officers photographed the scene. Fujimoto bagged the chashaku murder weapon. Emiko noticed the scoop's carved name. Kokoro, facing inward, not outward as custom dictated when resting on trays. Whoever touched it last lacked tea knowledge. She asked permission to examine Harding's body. Fujimoto raised an eyebrow but nodded. Inside the antiquarian's jacket pocket she found a slender paper packet. A folded furoshiki tag from Kikunoma's gift shop, blank, and beneath it a small shard of celadon glaze wrapped in tissue. Could be from the teapot, Fujimoto said. Or bargaining chip, Emiko added. Harding loved provoking collectors. Motive means opportunity. Opperding. Harding had threatened or blackmailed the wrong person, perhaps. But who stole Serio in the first place? Emiko pictured the timeline. 5:30 p.m., cabinet witnessed intact by Emiko. 6 o'clock, ceremony begins. 6:15, teapot discovered missing. 7 p.m., clocky-cocky dinner concludes. 7:20, Harding found dead. Thief strikes during ceremony, requires access to cabinet key or ability to pick latch. Harding goes outside, maybe confronts thief. Murderer snatches bamboo scoop from Mizuya, stabs Harding, abandons body. White clay. Only Sato's shoes showed it, but he explained plausibly. Yet the smudge on tatami could equally have come from a shoe of white leather, not wood powder clings differently to different soles. Mrs. Nishimura's zori had pristine surfaces. She could have wiped them before police arrived. Her kimono hem bore dark flecks. Soil? Blood? Emiko requested to review kitchen refuse. Kenji grumbled but complied. Among vegetable trimmings lay a thin painter's palette knife, normal for plating sauces. Its edge, however, was shiny clean, recently scrubbed. Used for the cabinet, perhaps, Emiko mused. A tea master's insight. She remembered her grandfather's maxim. Utensils speak truth, people only pretend. She re-entered the main tea room, now cold and deserted. She laid out the tea scoops. The missing kokoro scoop returned as murder weapon. Yet its bamboo smelled faintly of camellia oil used by conservatives to polish silver. The thief must have held the scoop after handling seiyu. Next, she examined lantern poles in the garden. On one, a scrap of purple fabric snagged on a hook, the same shade as the lining of Mrs. Nishimura's obi. Confrontation. Fujimoto gathered everyone in the tea room at Emiko's request. Iron kettle hissed. Outside, the moon sailed high, unperturbed. Emiko spoke softly. The spirit of tea is harmony, respect, purity, tranquility. Tonight we have suffered dishonor, but the way of tea also demands truth. She bowed to the detective. May I? He gestured for her to proceed. Sieru was stolen between 6 and 6:15. The lock was forced with a thin, flat tool. Chef Kenji's palette knife fits those scratches. Gasps rose, but Emiko lifted a hand. Kenji-san lent the knife earlier to Mrs. Nishimura to pry open a stubborn jar of plum syrup. He forgot to retrieve it. She never returned it. Emiko faced the widow. True? Mrs. Nishimura's fan fluttered. Yes, but you coveted Seiryu, Emiko continued. Years ago you bid on it and lost to my grandfather. Tonight you saw opportunity. A small, crowdless ceremony. An unlocked garden window. While our focus was on whisking tea, you used the palette knife, wrapped cereal in your obi cloth, and slipped out through the garden to hide it in the storage shed behind empty charcoal sacks. Detective Fujimoto signaled an officer, who returned moments later confirming that the teapot indeed lay swaddled in purple silk, where Emiko described. But where does Harding fit? Fujimoto asked. Emiko turned the bamboo scoop in her fingers. Philip saw her leaving the shed. He was no thief, but he loved the dramatic gesture. Perhaps he threatened to expose her unless she donated the teapot to the British Museum. They quarreled. She seized the nearest object, the scoop, and struck. In panic, she wiped her sandals on tatami, leaving a clay smear from the shed's floor, then removed the scoop, washed it, and returned it to the mizuya, forgetting that she replaced it wrong side up. She opened a cloth packet, revealing the purple scrap and the celadon shard. Harding retrieved this chip from Seiyo as proof. He pocketed it and followed her, unknowingly carrying his death warrant. Mrs. Nishimura's shoulders sagged like wilted blossoms. "He mocked me," she whispered, "called me a plunderer, said he'd ruin me in the papers." Professor Sato exhaled a string of silent syllables. Yuko pressed a hand to her lips. Aiko stared as though the world were a cracked cup. After the arrest, uniformed officers escorted the widow through the garden of fallen petals. Fujimoto offered Emiko a grave nod. "You studied in London, I heard." "Oxford, 2 years," she replied. "Explains the detective blood." He allowed himself a thin smile. "When you complete the formalities tomorrow, the teapot will be returned." Emiko remained in the tea room after everyone else departed, dawn's earliest brushstrokes silvery behind the shoji. She placed Seiyu on a crimson cloth before the hearth. The vessel's celadon shimmer felt serene, but its presence now carried the echo of violence. Still, tea had always been about transforming imperfection into grace. Yuko appeared with 2 bowls and fresh matcha. "Shall we, sensei?" Emiko whisked the tea until froth resembled green clouds, then handed the first bowl to her apprentice. They drank in silence, listening to the hush left behind when night tragedies end. "We will reenact the ceremony for our guests once the blossoms open fully," Emiko said at last. Yuko nodded, hope dawning like sunrise. "With Seiyu?" "Of course. Objects live long. We are their momentary caretakers." Emiko smiled, half British irony, half Japanese resignation. "And sometimes they're detectives." She slid open the shoji. Outside, a single petal drifted in the first light, unhurried, unafraid, finding its natural place on the veranda, where a century-old tea room still promised harmony amid human folly.